It's a very distinguished panel that we have today to talk about national energy policy issues. The moderator is Paul O'Neill, sitting there second from your right. Paul received a bachelor's degree from Fresno State University and a master's in public administration from Indiana University. He is one of those rare people who's had a very distinguished career both in the private sector, in private industry, and in the public sector. In the private sector, he, among his positions, served as president of International Paper and then chairman and CEO of Alcoa for 9 years. He also served in the Office of Management and Budget earlier in his career and served as Secretary of Treasury in 2001 and 2002. And we in Pittsburgh were so pleased when he returned to Pittsburgh after his stint in Washington. Paul, thank you for being here today to moderate this panel. Let me continue on to Paul's left, your right of Paul. At the end there is Joe Cannon, the president and CEO of the Fuel Freedom Foundation. Like Paul, Joe has had a very successful career in multiple sectors. After receiving a bachelor's and a law degree from Brigham Young University, he had a career in the private sector, in industry, in law practice, and even in journalism. In fact, he was editor of the Deseret News, the very well-known newspaper in Utah. In the public sector side, he was assistant administrator of the EPA during the Reagan administration. And to show you how brave he can be, he is still or was chair of the Utah State Republican Party. Not now, he's quick to point out. Former chairman of the Republican Party in the state of Utah. Joe, thank you for being here very much. Next to Paul is Marilu Hastings, the Vice President for Sustainability Programs at the Cynthia and George Mitchell Foundation. She received a bachelor's degree at Duke and MBA and Masters of Public Administration, University of Texas at Austin. She's been interested in the integration of social sciences into environmental decision-making throughout her career, something she's pursued as a policy analyst in the not-for-profit sector before joining the Mitchell Foundation. Thank you very much, and welcome back, I should say, to Carnegie Mellon, Marilu. Next to Marilu is Carol Dudley-Williams. Carol is a Carnegie Mellon alumna. She received a bachelor's degree in chemical engineering from CMU. And she spent her entire career basically at Dow Chemical Company, from which she retired just in the last couple of years. She rose to be executive vice president of Dow, and we at Carnegie Mellon are extremely proud of her, giving her every award we could as a distinguished alum. She's a member of the Carnegie Mellon Board of Trustees and a member of the advisory board of the Scott Institute. Carol, thank you very much for being here. And next to Carol, we have Michael McQuade. Michael is the Senior Vice President for Science and Technology at United Technologies Corporation, one of America's largest multi-industry companies. Michael received bachelor's, master's, and PhD, all in physics, from Carnegie Mellon, which we're very proud of also. Oh, go right ahead. That's an applause line. Absolutely. Michael was at 3M, Imation, and Kodak before joining UTC in 2006. Michael holds very prominent positions in public service also. He's a member of the Secretary of Energy's Advisory Board, better known as CAB, which is a very significant advisory board to the Secretary of DOE. He's also a member of PCAST, that's the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology, a very distinguished and prominent role to play. Michael is also a member of the Carnegie Mellon Board of Trustees and also a member of the Scott Institute Advisory Board. Michael, thank you for being here. And with that, I give it to you, Paul. Have fun, everybody.
Yes, we're going to have fun. So, Jerry, let me say, because you left it out of my introduction, I'm also affiliated with Carnegie Mellon University as an advisory committee member at the Heinz Colleges. So, we have lots of affiliation here, which I must say this is a great institution, and a significant part of its growing greatness is attributable to Jerry Cohen. So I want to begin by recognizing Deborah Stein, who's sitting quietly down here with her laptop, who's the, as far as I'm concerned, the organizer and the puller together across great distances of all of these people with busy schedules. So, Deborah, I don't think you've been recognized. I want to say thank you very much for them. And so one of the things Deborah told me to do, which I'm going to do, is to say the views presented here are those of the speaker in their private capacity and do not necessarily reflect the views of their employer or any organization with whom they are affiliated or have previously been affiliated, I will say for the moderator. And so we're all free to say what we wish, and you can't attribute it to someone else. So I'm delighted to be here. I hope some of you were here for the earlier panel of state and, to talk about the state and local level, which I thought was quite interesting. And I guess I would say as a listener, understated from my point of view, but I think that's partly because I have, I think as a function of age and impatience with getting on with things that a fact-based world has demonstrated to anybody who's paying attention, we need to take some action in a very clear way across these, what I consider to be one subject, energy and the environment. I don't think they're two subjects. But I'm going to try and repress my own views until there's an appropriate time to say them, and to use the suggested questions that came from Debbie as a starter, at least for our panel. So the first block of questions that have been proposed for our group is with regard to climate change. And here's the setup. One major difference among the candidates is the degree to which they believe climate change is a real concern. Some believe it is not occurring, while others believe it is occurring, but action is not warranted given the cost and benefits. And finally, there are those who both believe climate change is a concern and that action should be taken. So let me start here and ask for your thoughts on this proposition about climate change. Is it or isn't it, and should or shouldn't we take some action?
Gee, that's the easiest question of the day, so far anyway. The answer is there is a problem. It is happening. There's no question that there are man-caused, human-caused problems here, and there are things that you can and should do about it. ASAP. I mean, I have stronger views on what those things are, but if you have a bullet coming at your brain, then you have to do something. You have to do something fast, and so that's the answer to the question. We can get more into this.
No, I think we're going to do some more of this. So, do you all subscribe to what Joe said, or do you have a different opinion about whether we should or shouldn't do something, Marilu?
Well, I'm from Texas, which is not a fact-based world.
Really?
Really. And so Texans might say no, no, and no. But since I'm speaking on behalf of myself and someone on the foundation, because we're pretty closely aligned, otherwise it wouldn't work there. But I would say yes, yes, and yes. I do feel compelled to say, however, that climate is not our only bullet coming at us. So I'm sure that there will be opportunity to talk more about that.
Okay, good. Carol?
No, I'm a strong believer that we have an issue that needs to be dealt with effectively to address our economy, to address the challenges that we have, to address all of the different types of energy supply that we need. So it's not a one component answer, I don't believe, but yes, it is happening, and yes, something needs to happen.
Okay, Michael.
Well, I think it's unanimous. So I would say that I think any debate on whether global warming is happening, whether carbon in the atmosphere is increasing, there's a set of facts, and you really can't debate the facts. To me, the only legitimate conversation is how do we balance different constituents over different time frames. So the ultimate discussion that we need to be having is how much are we willing to forego our current needs and short-term issues, which are real, against those of our children, let's call it the 2050 time frame, and perhaps with some of the data that's showing up now, thinking even much longer than that regardless of what we do between now and amelioration for 2050, we have some very significant actions and impacts that are going to happen in the next century. So I think the conversation and debate needs to be one about how we balance across those time frames, not whether the world is warming, not whether carbon is increasing in the atmosphere.
So I want to say one thing for myself on this basic question. When I was at International Paper and then at Alcoa, I had a real business need to look at these issues because aluminum manufacturing is one of the most energy-intensive production processes in the world. And so I went to school. I really began to dig into literature and not read opinion pieces, but try to learn the science. And this is now early 1990s, and I looked at enough data that I was convinced there was no doubt that there had been a serious increase in the accumulation of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And I convinced myself this whole business about whether it was man-made or not had nothing to do with the proposition, are we going to suffocate ourselves in time or not? Because it seemed so clear to me. And so I honestly have not much patience with people who want to say, we don't have to worry about this issue, because there is no doubt in the world, if you're interested in any data, that we have had and continue to have a growing accumulation of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. I'll tell you later about how that backs up into decisions at Alcoa, where I discovered, because the chairman of DuPont called me to tell me that they were going to make an announcement that they were going to stop producing materials that produce greenhouse gases. And he said, I'm calling you to tell you, Paul, because the next largest producer of greenhouse gases in the universe is the aluminum industry that produces greenhouse gases that are 2,000 to 3,000 times as potent as run-of-the-mill carbon dioxide emissions. That was really a wake-up call for me. And then with our scientists, we figured out how to stop doing that. We didn't ask the EPA, is this okay or not? We just fixed it. We had to invest some money in science and technology. So I'm frankly very impatient with people who want to say, there's no problem, let's go on to the next issue. So part B of this question is, international relations and energy are also an issue of discussion. Some candidates believe the U.S. should abide by the Paris agreements, and others, the U.S. should withdraw. So, opinions?
So I view Paris as very largely aspirational. Okay. So the answer is we should do whatever we could do. I mean, if we want to now get into the kind of merits of things, one of the problems that we have in addressing this problem is that, I'll be really colloquial here, President Jerry, a lot of people live in unicorn land, and a lot of people live in gravity land. And unfortunately, a lot of solutions kind of, I guess I'm being pejorative, I don't mean it to be pejorative, don't work. You mentioned DuPont and Dow. If you look at what happened on ozone depletion, so a lot of industry came forward very constructively but they also provided an alternative. So you didn't tell people, oh, yeah, don't worry about the refrigeration stuff. Yeah, don't worry about the air conditioning stuff. We'll figure out a way to do something that does not enhance. I was involved in this way early in my career at EPA. So, that to me, that was like a gravity land response to this. I think, so there were a lot of hopes, dreams, wishes, prayers, aspirations to solving this, but, a lot of times it overlooks some of the really concrete things that can happen. So I'll just go way out. I hope no one has sharp objects out there, but look, there's a major energy source that produces zero carbon emissions, and that's nuclear power. If you have a bullet, that's what I was saying, so a bullet coming at your brain, you're thinking, well, we know it works. Does that have problems? Yeah, every single energy source has problems, but that happens to be one that has, at least in the biggest problem that we're thinking about, it doesn't happen to have any greenhouse gas emissions of any kind, by the way, CO2 or any other. So it seems to me that we have a solution sitting in front of us and that we ought to be optimizing around, at least to some extent, given the enormity and severity of the potential problem. And we have some time frame to work with it. So, yeah, I got away from the Paris.
No,
I think
it's okay. Let's go to school on your answer to the question. So the freight of the idea of the Paris Accords is a set of knowledge about you really know what they negotiated and what they agreed to in Paris, and does that make any sense? And so I want to harken back a little bit to our on-deck conversation about aspirational goals. So for me personally, I found thinking about the world starting from aspirational goals is a way to organize facts and information so that, in effect, you drain the swamp and you can see everything better than you can if you don't have aspirational goals. And so Joe was kidding me because he knows when I was at Alcoa, the day I arrived there, I announced Alcoa with 143,000 employees in 43 countries was going to be an injury-free workplace. And even the safety vice president thought I was out of my mind. But over time, we became the safest large company in the whole world, right? But it started with an aspirational goal and then put a burden on the leadership to take away and eliminate all of the reasons why not. All right, so transferred into this arena, I would say the aspirational goal is to have a society and a civilization, at least in the United States, that does not commit environmental damage. And so if you think back from where we are now, I was saying earlier, an aspirational goal in this area would be to have no net addition to greenhouse gases in the atmosphere from the U.S. economy. That would be an aspirational goal. And the reason aspirational goals are important is because they help you to evaluate the pathways to getting to your aspirational goal and to put prices on the steps to take to get there. So with that modification of a question, Marilu, let me turn to you and ask you, maybe you want to talk in terms of Paris or in terms of aspirational goals. Where do you think we in the United States ought to be on this issue?
Well, so moving from Paris to the U.S., I think I'll stay a little bit on the global level.
Okay.
Although it's not where I work on a day-to-day basis because, again, it's Texas. But we are, in some ways, at a global scale because we're, depending on the year, the 6th or 7th largest emitter of greenhouse gas if we were a country, which some people think we are. But I would say I would do kind of a combination of what Michael alluded to in terms of the trade-offs between our generation and my little 10-year-old daughter's over there because we're on spring break this week, her generation, what's fair for me to do today, for me to forego so that, with the help of everyone that she can have a good future, and all of our children can have a good future, but it's also trade-offs between our country or developed countries and countries who are not developed yet. And when I think about, so this is much broader, when I think about aspirational goals sort of in that context, I think that the U.S. has a role to play because we are leaders, we're global leaders. What we do matters. What we do about Paris, about adopting it or implementing it, it matters on a global scale. But of course, the trade-off, the problem, the complication among all the complications is we won't be the largest emitter in the future, in the nearer future. And so when you look at China and India and some of the countries who need development, what do we do as an industrialized country is a different basket than what developing countries need to do. And so to me, the way to look at that is what's good for the well-being of developing countries. And it's not how much energy efficiency do they need in their homes or buildings like we do here. It's a girl needs a light bulb so that she can learn to read. A woman needs a way to get water into her home for her children so that she doesn't have to walk 10 miles a day and back because she doesn't have access to clean water. And it takes energy to clean and distribute water, a huge amount of energy. We need, developing countries, women need clean power, a way to cook that is not destroying her health and the health of her children. But if you give a girl a light bulb and she learns to read, she will delay childbearing. And even if she only delays childbearing by 1 year, it has a phenomenal impact on global population growth. If she has one fewer children than she ordinarily would, because she can read. That's the determining factor. My child can read because she's blessed to live in this country. But a girl in India or China may not learn to read. And that has a huge impact on our energy use, on consumption of energy, on the choices that she and her children after her will make. And I think that my personal opinion is that's far more, in the long term, that's far more important than what we're going to do here.
Okay, Marilu, so I agree substantially with what you said about the global worldview and the developing world, but let me make it a little bit more complicated. Most of the aluminum smelting industry in the United States has shut down. And the reason it's shut down is because China has built enormous amounts of new smelting capacity where they have no competitive advantage, and they built all the smelting capacity on the back of brown coal-fired power plants. So do we really give them a pass on what they do to the environment?
Well, I was telling Elena when we drove over here that Pittsburgh was the center of the U.S. steel industry, and I had to explain to her what that was about and where that went. And so I just briefed her on some of that. No, I don't think that we can give, that's the hard part that Michael talked about, that trade-off. Do industrialized countries, rich countries, do we pay developing countries to make better choices? That I'm out of my league on that question. I mean, that's the essential human question on these issues that Paris and all of the meetings before Paris and that will come after Paris and the political discussions that we're having in this country and will be having are about these trade-offs. That's the nugget of do we pay, and part of it is climate is the ultimate global common. I was in college in the 80s and in political science, and we used to talk about mutually assured destruction in the nuclear context, nuclear war. I don't know if they talk about that anymore, but It was a very 80s kind of thing. But if you think about climate in the same sort of way, if the U.S. does everything that we possibly can, it's not enough. If China does everything it can, it's not enough. The globe has to work, has to come together in a way that we have never done before. I don't know that there's a human precedent for it, and I think the jury's out about whether it's even humanly possible to go outside of our genetic drive of self-interest to act for the global commons. I think that that's kind of the crux of the issue. Can the United States go against our immediate self-interest in order to put some type of implementation or some type of force, whatever that is, on developing countries, including China, with steel and coal and aluminum production and all the others, to limit their carbon and greenhouse gas emissions? Like you said, it's more than just CO2. I don't know the answer to those questions, but the way I frame it in my mind is it's a humanity question about the globe and the tragedy of the commons.
So Carol, let's draw you into this.
Sure. I would say I think Americans do well when we set an audacious goal out there. Let's go to the moon. We didn't have a clue how we were going to go to the moon. So I do think that that can be a positive thing in the U.S. And as has already been mentioned, this is a global issue. I mean, one can't do it by themselves. But I do think when we start thinking of it as an opportunity and not the problem, we find solutions that can drive us to where we need to be. I mean, look at the installations in wind that have happened, and it did not start off being competitive. And maybe at $1.50 gas, it's not, but long term, it's probably not going to be there. So it is getting very close to being very competitive and has over-delivered, I think, what people's expectations were about intermittency and the ability to have it in the grid and have it managed. So I think that when we look at it as an opportunity, that can provide the United States. I mean, energy and manufacturing go hand in hand. The data is so clear that when our cost of energy went up so sky high, manufacturing went down, and so did exports. And when that changed, it comes back. And we are a technology strength and a productivity engine for the world. I mean, China is not the same. They may have lower labor rates, but they are not as productive, even yet today. So I think we as a country need to say we have to participate, put a hairy, audacious goal out there, and look at it as an opportunity. This is what Pittsburgh has done. They have converted themselves, and it is an amazing story. And we need to think that way as the United States.
Mike?
So I get to sort of synthesize what everybody said because I'm not sure I have anything new to add. I guess I would just say a couple of things. So first of all, I think not being the world leader and not moving forward with the agreement in Paris is morally reprehensible. I find it very hard to accept an argument that says we should not do the right thing because somebody else might not. I mean, that's not U.S. leadership. It has never been U.S. leadership. It is absolutely true that if we do everything possible that we commit to, that's insufficient. But I think there are, in addition to the benefits in the U.S. that Carol talked about from a greener energy and power infrastructure, better utilization, et cetera, I think there are, in fact, two other world constituents for which the U.S. leadership and participation allows us to change the world. One is, and look, we refer to China as a developing country. It is by certain definitions, but it is a country of 1 billion people who are accessing and aspiring to what the rest of the world has. And if you think the world is an interconnected place today, you haven't even begun to understand what it'll be like 20 years from now. And so I don't think that a model that says 20 years from now or 25 years from now, 1.5 billion people in China are going to accept a different world than we aspire to from an environmental protection point of view, from an energy point of view. So I think there's a constituent there that will benefit by the commitment to the technology and the investments in changing the way we do energy infrastructure. I think the other dynamic to take a look at is sort of it's a bad choice of words, but let me say the real developing world, the places that don't have light, the places where people don't have food and water that you talked about, Marilu. I think the solution is a solution that will be delivered by the rest of the world, helping to deliver technology and investment in that part of the world. And I think Paris provides the vehicle for those of us who can to do. And I think doing that in a responsible way, doing that with technology that is tailored for an economy and an environment that makes that work, I think these things all go hand in hand. And I think Paris represents, to be clear, Paris is not sufficient. The agreements that were reached in Paris, if everybody does their part and we achieve the goals we reached in Paris, are not enough to bring global warming to a level below sort of the consequence being below 450 parts per million.
Right.
It's not enough. On the other hand, I can tell you not doing what we said in Paris is a knife in the heart. We know that not doing something is completely insufficient. So I would rather be partway along than to throw up my hands and say, it's not enough, therefore we shouldn't do anything, or the other guys aren't going to do it, therefore we shouldn't do anything. It's a leadership issue.
Okay, so Mike, this time let's start at your end with this question. Some candidates are advocating the elimination of the Department of Energy and EPA for some substantial modifications and are denigrating the efforts of regulation and the way it's being done and the way it's being imposed in different sectors. And so the question is, what do you think?
So if I can divide your question into two parts. Let me put regulation aside for a moment.
Okay. Let's start with existence.
Okay, so a candidate whose position is we should eliminate the DOE or the EPA, in my mind, has failed an intelligence test to be the president of a complex nation. It's a silly statement. It's just plain silly. Those agencies exist for a lot of reasons. There's a lot of bloat. There's a lot of reasons that they create complexity in the world. We could have a long debate about regulations, et cetera. But to say that the agency that funds energy development across the board, that funds primary innovation, is the largest funder of basic fundamental science research, should not exist because you happen to not like their renewables policy, I'm sorry, that's just a statement that you're not qualified to be a president of the United States. Full stop.
We get asked questions about the EPA in the company that I came from because of the regulations. And my comment back has always been, we need the regulations for the entire industry. And I use an example of Germany. Germany has lots of regulations. You follow it from A to Z, you're going to get a permit. One of the challenges in the US is the steps are A to D this time, and then, the permit process needs a lot of focus, but it is absolutely needed. So I agree with Michael that we could improve on what we already have, even if it becomes more onerous, if the process is detailed and understood. But to say we don't need DOE and the EPA, I think is a huge challenge for our nation, for what would be that next step. And the funding for the research programs in our country would be gone. And there would be this big hole that companies don't have that basic research activity going on. So I totally agree with Michael.
Marilu.
I would just add a little bit that I think it was Ted Cruz's website, but I might have it wrong, that refers to DOE as a regulatory agency, which is why he wants to get rid of it. But they're not a regulatory agency, as you all know. And I work for the late George Mitchell, who was an early pioneer of shale development. And while some people call him the father of fracking, which is inaccurate, he could not have figured out the key to unlocking shale resources without DOE. I always give DOE and the Gas Technology Institute fair credit with when I talk about Mr. Mitchell and shale, but I don't know that some of the candidates who want to do away with DOE realize the important role that DOE plays on even fossil fuel development. We're working with them on carbon capture and sequestration, which is how to keep some coal plants, utilities open to capture the carbon and use it for enhanced oil recovery. Anyway, they play an important role on research and development of energy resources across the spectrum that doesn't have anything to do with regulations. On the EPA side, I would invite them to take a look at some history and recall when Ronald Reagan and Ann Gorsuch, the EPA administrator, tried to do away with or reduce the role of EPA. There was no greater impetus to the growth of the environmental movement than James Watt and Ann Gorsuch and Ronald Reagan. It was a boon for the environmental community, and they shut them down. They fired both of them, from what I remember. So I don't think that you can get away with the public. The public's a lot different than it was then today, but I think that it would be a hard lesson for them to learn that you can't get rid of environmental regulation in this country.
So as the former proprietor, Joe, what do you say?
Well, I have a unique perspective on quite a lot of this, but let me just start with DOE to start. I mean, the vast percentage of what DOE does doesn't even have to do with climate. It doesn't have to do with renewable. It has to do with nuclear bombs. Right. And so when people talk about, especially these very let me start up with the footnote. I don't like any of the candidates, any of the 4 leading candidates today. So I don't really ever want to be, I don't want to be put in a position of defending anybody's statements. But it is ridiculous to say that you want to get rid of DOE. It's actually shows no actual knowledge of what happens over there. The tiny little bit that they do with renewable energy isn't enough. So the whole thing is, you got this whale over here and a few minnows floating by it. That's really what's arousing the ire of some of these folks. And we need more of a whale on the renewable energy side of things. So that's nonsensical. As it happens, I am the only human being, political appointee, who worked both for Ann Gorsuch and Bill Ruckelshaus. So everyone was fired. And I thought, I wouldn't tell the whole story, but I thought, well, I'd never met Bill at the time. He became a huge mentor for me. But so there were 4 of us left on his first day. He brought 4 of them in, one of them you know pretty well, I think, and fired the first 3. And here I'm in my early 30s. I was head of the policy office. I'm thinking, I'm just dead. And he said, oh, I'm going to keep you. And won't get too self-congratulatory here, but there are reasons that I was able to, I had played an instrumental role in triggering the elimination of lead, for example, in gasoline. But anyway, the whole nightmare of my own personal life there was that even as a Republican, I'll just say this, I know probably not too many Republicans in this room, but as a Republican, just for the record, EPA was created by a Republican president.
By Richard Nixon, you can say that.
And it is, I didn't like him either, though. That's the problem. But he did do a few virtuous things.
He did do that.
But here's the thing. You need regulation. Even as a conservative, as a Republican, you say, we would have lead in gasoline today if it weren't for EPA, period, the end. There was no natural movement on the part of the oil industry to eliminate lead. And that's just true with the vast number of things. Now, I have definite problems, as anyone who has had to deal with the regulatory end of EPA. It can be a nightmare. I mean, even when you want to do everything right, our foundation is working with EPA on an issue right now, and we've done everything, and we get a letter back saying, what about this? What about that? We're going, hey, we read your regulations. I mean, I'm a Clean Air Act lawyer in my past, and you say, we ask you, tell us what to do. We actually want to do whatever it is you want us to do. So there are problems in the administrative state. I'm not going to argue against that, but it's insane to talk about getting away of there are areas of regulation that Jimmy Carter got away from, and we don't regulate trucks anymore, we don't regulate trains, we don't regulate airline raids. There are a lot of things that were, really stupid ideas from a regulatory standpoint, but you have to have a regulatory framework in place to get people to do things that they would not do on their own, that protect people against harms that they can't otherwise protect themselves against. And that's what environmental regulation is at root. So, don't make me defend again anybody.
No, it's okay.
I don't really like any of them right now.
I'm about 3 steps further than what you said, all of which I agree with. When I was the chairman of Alcoa, and it was my privilege with my support of my board to articulate aspirational goals, I said to all of the people in Alcoa, we are not going to be a compliance company. We are going to perform in such a way that no one can find fault with what we do in anything we do, beginning with worker safety, but extending to we're going to work to figure out how to eliminate solid waste from our process. We're going to work to eliminate any discharge into a stream that isn't better than what we're putting into the stream, okay? So that with drinkable, potable, swimmable, all of those things, our commitment was to do that without waiting for somebody in the EPA to come and say, hey, by the way, there are no fish in your downstream activities. What the hell? So my belief is a responsible leader in an enterprise of any size has a responsibility not to create external economic negatives for the society because somebody hasn't yet awakened to the fact that they're creating collateral damage that is not the fault of the receiving water streams or air environments or the rest of that. And I'm proud to be associated with a group here in Pittsburgh that's trying to take that same principle, put together a consortium of producers and people like David, who was on the last panel, to figure out how to produce shale gas in a way that it is no environmental insult at all, with zero methane emissions and zero water contamination and the rest of that. And so I think there is a higher place where some people want to live, where they take the obligation to do the right thing in a consortium of concerned and interested parties without waiting for somebody to hammer them into submission. And for me, that's the ideal state of a democracy, is to have people be responsible for reaching for a higher level of existence than what somebody compels you to do.
Gee, Mr. Chairman, could I just say one thing?
Please.
Going back to what the whole fundamental
You did the
principles
same thing when you were in the steel business, Joe.
Well, it is true. We created the first PM10 state implementation plan, and we did it before anybody made us. However, I just want to go back to gravity land a little bit here. If, as James Madison said in Federalist 10, if men were angels, we wouldn't need government. So if all the CEOs of all the companies were Paul O'Neill, I'm feeling okay about life, at least for the lifespan of you. But the fact is that isn't how it works. And even with due respect to, because we've both been involved in industry trade groups before, even for the virtuous people, you need to have the protection that you're not going to go out on a limb and kill your cost out of virtue and have some not so good actor say, good for you, Paul, that's great that you did that. But you know what? I'm looking at the regulations here, and I'm allowed 29 parts per billion of X, and till somebody tells me it's 28, it's 29. And so I'm not arguing.
No, I know.
The fact is, that's the whole point of law in society. We need to live in an ordered society.
I agree with you. And let me step down a half a step and say, I think we could benefit the whole society if we had regulations with clear numerical standards and expectations, so there wasn't so much ambiguity and need for ever more regulatory intervention. So let me deal my favorite subject area in occupational safety and health. you know, because of what I know can be done from my own experience and other companies, I believe we ought to basically, OSHA should not be out measuring the length of ladders to make sure companies are in compliance. We ought to have a regulation that says if your workplace injury rate is more than 2 per 100 employees, you're going to lose your license to operate, because it is possible to be very close to 0. So 2 is a pretty lax standard. And as I was telling you earlier, the most dangerous industry in the United States is health and medical care, where OSHA recordables are 5 or 6 per 100 employees, and that's a standing thing. What the hell? So excuse me for the
Can I pull the conversation back just a minute to the technology side for a moment, because I want to bring two things together. So we've talked yesterday and today. So energy systems are enormously complex. They're not, gee, I have the best solar panel, therefore the world is fine, right? There's economics, there's a lot of things that go around with it. And it's, to me, the solution for where we need to be 10 years, 20 years, 30 years from now is a series of energy sources that are increasingly as zero carbon as possible. So I'm choosing words very carefully. To me, that means all the renewable things we talk about, but it also means how do we turn carbon green? So sequestration, all the other things that go along with it, right? At the end of the day, while all the other complexities around economics and infrastructure and all those have to be dealt with, it is a technical set of solutions that we have to deliver that we have not yet delivered. Okay, so that's my one starting assumption. Now I go back to the question about a place like the DOE or the National Science Foundation or the other places that are sort of under attack. It is still the case that the single largest competitive advantage that the United States has is the unique combination that does not yet exist anywhere else in the world, which is the Vannevar-Bush model from almost 100 years ago. It's national investment in science and technology at the basic research level. It's industrial innovation, companies willing to spend beyond the next quarter. And it's the greatest academic research universities in the world. And when we start to put an arrow into that triumvirate and kill it, then we will not be competitive no matter what. And so the role that each of those has to play is a role that we have to preserve. And when I hear conversations about we need to sign a loyalty pledge before we put a grant into the National Science Foundation, or we don't need a DOE because industry will spend on basic research. Preserving that national model, that model that brought us the physics revolution of the 50s and 60s, that brought us telecommunication, that brought us microprocessors, that brought us green agriculture. If we kill that, shame on us. It's not recoverable. That's the single biggest competitive advantage that we have right now.
Good. So, absolutely. Let's change courses for a moment and talk about renewable energy and energy efficiency. So, if you've watched some of the debates, which I presume you have, or all of them, which I must confess, I think I've seen almost all of them, and they're all lacking in one thing, or substantially lacking in one thing, and that is facts. All right, so here's the suggested question. Candidates have proposed a certain percentage of our energy should come from renewable sources. What percentage do you think is reasonable? So I'm going to ask you that question, and then I'm going to say to you, tell me your fact base. You know, for me, it's not okay to have an answer unless you know why. You know, so it's so aggravating to me. Sometimes I find myself standing in front of the television yelling, why? Because none of them provide anything about why they believe almost anything. So how do we think about this issue? I would say it's obvious that renewables are a desirable thing, but there are economic costs and consequences. And if you have a percentage in mind, it has to be because you've thought really deeply and understand the economics of all the alternative forms of production of energy. So, Joe, what do we do with this?
Wow, so I have a choice of being a real idiot and naming a number.
No.
I don't have a number. Let me just start out there. I want to go back to something that was said earlier, and that is, how do we view this whole problem? If we view it as some way to deny ourselves and go on some monastic fast from carbon-based energy. If that's how we're going to do it, we won't win. I'm just sorry, the market rules.
We won't survive.
Yeah, so the real answer is how do you approach this in a creative way that makes people want to do things that are cheaper, cleaner, and more efficient? How do you do that? And you mentioned the whole massive intellectual infrastructure that we have in the United States. You need to be thinking of that way. But I would propose that the most significant way to look at it is how do we do something in a way that attracts the vast number of people, not just in the United States, and not just people who wake up in the morning wanting to be virtuous, but how do we get people to want to do a market-based thing that is going to work? I don't know the answer to every one of those questions. I apologize getting us off track early on nuclear, but you need to think of particular things. What are the particular things that people are going to do? Are we going to we spend an enormous amount of our environmental energy on coal. We spent last year in the United States something like $36 billion on coal. We spent something like $300 and some odd billion on petroleum. And one of the reasons I paused when you asked about Paris earlier, I've read many of the documents and all of the final documents. There's very little on there about what you can do about transportation. And I don't want to get into my own little bailiwick because this is what I spend most of my life thinking about. But the answer is you've got to get consumers to want to do something that's attractive. If you go out and hector people and say, no, you know what, we're like I was saying about chlorofluorocarbons here. Yeah, we're just going to do without air conditioning. No, that will not work. That people will annihilate EPA if something crazy like that happens. So you have to figure out a way to motivate people to want to do it. And with all due respect to the virtue of universities, most people work off of a cost basis. You know, everybody from the moms in Africa and India to moms at Squirrel Hill here near here, you have to figure out what is going to motivate people to want to do the right thing. Otherwise, I just don't see how you can win.
Let me ask you a related question because of your knowledge of these subjects and your regulatory background. In your mind, is it feasible to create a shadow pricing system for greenhouse gas emissions related to units of energy so that we could create an equal playing territory for solar and wind and natural gas and oil and nuclear and all of the alternatives? Is it feasible to create a pricing environment that helps make the decision clearer?
Yeah. So our old friends at the American Enterprise Institute think about that a lot, and they actually proposed the idea of some kind of a carbon tax. It 100% of the time, no matter who the president is, who the vice president is, I'm thinking of Clinton, Gore, carbon tax ends up with nothing to 100 in the U.S. Senate or some crazy thing.
Right.
So the answer is it's possible. I mean, part of my academic, my regulatory side says, yeah, that'd be a great idea. Somehow you still have to bust through all that to get to consumers, to get them to say, you know what, and I'll say this as a conservative, some amount of subsidization is okay. Solar panels are going crazy in a lot of states because lots of states are incentivizing people to put solar panels on, and then they feel kind of good because they're poking the ugly utility in the nose too, so in the eye. So yeah, there are things that you can do that don't get into the calculation of the consumer's brain. Ooh, let's see, the carbon value of this is X and that's Y. I'm going to choose Y because that's better. No, I'm going to choose Y because I can put a solar panel on my house and it works pretty well, and I don't have to pay the utility anything. And in fact, in a lot of states, the utilities have to pay you for it. So I think getting down at the consumer level, and I didn't really answer your question. The answer to your question is yes, you can do that.
Okay.
Theoretically.
Okay,
in reality, the people who get elected to
I
office.
think this is like lots of questions. If you limit yourself to analytics and facts, you can come to an answer, and then you run into the stone wall of this is politically impossible.
Right.
So then the question becomes, how do we make it politically possible? But let me turn to our other panel members and get them into this.
I'm sorry.
Joke.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. Marilu, tell us what you think about this.
Which thing? Efficiency and
No, I want
renewables,
to,
the
no,
whole?
so the specific question is there a percent
Right.
of our energy that we should demand we get from renewables? And if so, my addition to that is how do you know? What's the basis for your answer?
Well, I don't have a number either. Some people say 80% based on some analytics of sort of the climate community, the non-NGO climate community varies between 100% and 80% based on some technical, where's the technology, where are the prices, where are the states and the policy environment. At home, Governor George W. Bush deregulated our energy market called ERCOT in 1999, and also was the impetus behind our renewable portfolio standard, which is quaint today, but it's still there, but we've far exceeded it on wind. One could argue, which we do at home in order to sort of be able to be part of the conversation on clean energy in a very conservative environment, that Texas, we just have commissioned some research that's going to come out within the next month by the Brattle Group of where Texas stands on the Clean Power Plan right now. And these results aren't public yet, but the results that we have show that Texas, in the current market, deregulated market that we have, a lot of wind, emerging solar, a lot of natural gas, that we don't need the Clean Power Plan. We will meet the Clean Power Plan. I don't know exactly the time frame that they have on the report, but it's a trifle.
It's doable.
Purely market driven. What's that percentage? Well, it's certainly what EPA is asking, the stay notwithstanding. If the Clean Power Plan was going ahead, Texas would meet and exceed the Clean Power Plan requirements without a problem. We need the market. We don't need the Clean Power Plan.
Okay.
And we have a competitive, energy-only, deregulated, highly functioning, very sophisticated, fairly efficient energy market in Texas. And if you hold that up as a model, which I'm not saying that one should, but it works for Texas or most of Texas, we have had days where wind energy is over 50%.
Wow.
So I don't have a magic number, and when my colleagues or grantees come at me and say, why are you, shame on you for all this shale stuff that Mr. Mitchell helped develop. You should be for 100% renewables. And I say, if it wasn't for shale gas, you wouldn't have your renewables. Certainly in Texas, wind, with all the variability and congestion and whatnot, we would not have wind energy without shale gas. Solar is a different, if I can take just a brief moment, solar is a different story. What's happening mostly in Texas is utility scale solar, utility scale PV solar out in West Texas, and the solar industry, with all due respect to anyone in the solar community, sometimes is not any better than some of our fossil fuel friends in their lack of proactive decision-making about their siting choices. And when I asked the Texas solar industry, what are you doing about siting in far west Texas, which is a uniquely beautiful place, partly beautiful because there isn't anyone out there, and they say, well, there isn't anyone out there. It doesn't matter if we carpet the Chihuahuan Desert with solar panels. Well, it does matter when you talk about putting 900 football fields worth of solar panels in the Trans-Pecos Chihuahuan Desert, it does matter. And one of the things that we focus on in the foundation and emerging area for us is the renewables and land, habitat, species, biodiversity aspects, not just with solar, but with wind as well, because you have to include in your calculus transmission. So renewables does not, I guess, in the calculus that the foundation holds is carbon is not the only metric. We include water. So we're proponents of clean and water lean energy in Texas, or ERCOT. And for us, that spells renewables and wind and solar, rooftop solar, because we've already had that impact. Why not put solar panels on the roofs? We know why. It's economically very difficult. But if you include the social cost of transmission lines across habitat, again, and farms, I don't know that they wouldn't be, that solar panels on a rooftop would not come out if you did a cost benefit or whatever you want to do, that solar rooftop panels would not be less expensive than utility scale. Of course, utilities like solar, utility scale solar, because they own the generation. Of course they want that. They don't like rooftop solar. Anyway, I could go on a long time about that, and I already have. So I don't have a number. I don't think carbon's the only number. You need to look at land impact. You need to look at the whole thing, and that includes water.
Marilu, with your deep knowledge of Texas, I wonder, do you know this? So 20 years ago, 1996, the state of Texas had a certain level of greenhouse gas emissions. Do you have any idea, with all the things that have taken place, how much that's been reduced in the last 20 years?
I am sorry, I do not know the
It
answer
seems
to
to me
that
it
question.
would be a really big talking point for Texas to be able to say, look what we've done because of the regulatory approach we've taken and the kind of free fall of, God gave us natural gas and the rest of that. But it would be a really interesting factoid to have in this conversation of what has happened in a real place that is the source of lots of energy production.
I don't know the exact number. I know that industrial output, energy units per industrial output has been declining, as you probably know.
Absolutely.
Industry has every incentive to reduce its energy load. Texas, of course, is a rapidly growing state, but we also produce 25% of the petroleum products and plastics for the rest of the country. That contributes to our economic and human well-being and health. And if we didn't have that refinery area around Houston, which is a different question than coal-fired power plants. But in terms of industrial output, it is declining. It has declined over those 20 years, but I wouldn't know the numbers off the top of my head.
Thank you. Carol.
Sure. Well, I'm going to go back to Dow when I worked at Dow. So renewables, again, provide opportunity. So if you look at solar panels there's all this, we need the efficiency better and all of that. Well, Dow went after it and said, why put a roof up and then put the panels on the roof? So they developed a way to have the shingle hold the solar panel. And the arrays go together, and you build your roof with your solar array as a part of the roof. And when you look at the economics there, yes, we still need to improve the efficiency of and the effectiveness of that solar, the piece that goes into that. But there are other system developments that we can do to make our processes better. We also participate in the epoxy side of windmill blade development. And the work that's gone on to make those bigger and more effective, along with the people that have the other mechanisms, those have been great system developments across industries. And then go to the Texas situation where that was industry and government and university partnerships to build a lot of that initial wind power that went in there. And they were also very creative that to not have some peaker units in Texas, they went to industry and said, I had chlorine, so the other big power hog is chlorine. And they actually had a button, and they could turn my chlorine plant off. So Texas became very creative in all kinds of things, in the renewables. So they did the policy of all, and I think it's been part of their success around it. Now, one of the challenges in solar is we still don't make it easy for people. So to get a solar installation on your roof in Colorado, it's one piece of paper. In Michigan, it's about a 27-page document that a homeowner could not fill out without help from somebody. So we also have to make our systems easy for people when they want to participate in the process.
So I'm going to harken back to a conversation I had when I was running a healthcare business earlier in my career, and was talking to one of my regional people, and I asked him why he didn't have twice the market share that he had now. And he said, well, if I had twice the market share, I'd have to take it away from somebody, and it's really competitive. And I said, I understand that the market's not growing, but you only have 1% market share. You know, the difference between 1% and 2% is noise. So, long answer to your question. I'm not sure that setting a target for renewables today at some mythically high level without having the storage technology we need or the grid technology that we need to do legitimate smart grid for intermittent sources without really understanding the environmental consequences of large-scale solar. On the other hand, doubling the amount of intermittent renewables we have now in the shortest possible time seems to me to be a legitimate goal. The grid will take it, the consumers will take it, the pricing structure will take it. I mean, I think a series of shorter-term staged goals for renewable is much better than saying, by date certain, we'll have a certain amount of renewables in the portfolio.
So some other hot buttons in this particular 2016 campaign are drilling in the Arctic, offshore drilling. I understand, I guess there's a new decision apparently coming on offshore drilling, Keystone Pipeline. And I just wonder, Mike, let's start this time with you. Do you all have something you'd like to say to this group about any and all of those subjects?
Can I say no? I want to try and strike sort of the middle ground. I guess I want to play options at this point. I'm not sure that we need to be drilling in the Arctic right now. I think there may come a time when we need to. There may come a time when we're smart enough to be able to do that. I would like to believe that when that time comes, we are properly provisioned to do that, but I don't see the need to be doing it right now. I think we have, with an enormous amount of investment, both publicly and privately, reached a place where shale oil and gas are sufficiently changing the mix in the United States right now. I'm not sure that we need to be opening up additional major sources right now. I would keep them warm, but I would not be moving forward.
Carol.
I think we have to get to the point where we can successfully feel that our standards for the drill needs will meet the requirements, whether it's Arctic or deep offshore. We make very dangerous things in this country every day, very successfully, and have to deal with the transportation. All of those issues get managed on a day-to-day basis, just like they do in the drilling industry. Can you have people who make mistakes, do the wrong thing? Yes. And that's part of the challenge that we have in this situation, because the mistakes can be so big and so tremendous. And so I agree, I don't think we need the Arctic now. Someday we might, because if we haven't transitioned fast enough and we're still very dependent upon fossil fuels, then that could be necessary. But I think we have to set the standards and get the people to do effective drilling, that they're managing the water management, that they're managing the methane emissions, that they're using the right drill muds so that they're not having issues. I mean, your safety focus, we totally studied the issue of what the incredible chain of events that led to what happened in the Gulf region. And, so many things had to go wrong and people wouldn't speak up. And so do you have cultures that people will speak up when things are wrong? It has many things that has to be discussed, but we can successfully. We have been successfully fracturing for a long time. We're now horizontally fracturing very successfully every day, and we need to make sure that everybody is following what is needed to do it safely and environmentally safe.
Marilu.
When I was at the Houston Advanced Research Center, one of Mr. Mitchell's organizations, one of the things that I studied was oil and gas industry development, their environmental decision-making in remote environments. And these were highly sensitive, socially and environmentally sensitive environments in the Amazon and then the Arctic. And my dad, my late father, was a petroleum engineer for ARCO for 35 years, and he worked with Mr. Anderson to lead the development of Prudhoe Bay in Alaska. And when BP announced that they were buying ARCO, I ran up there as fast as I could to study BP and ARCO and Exxon and their environmental decision-making in Alaska. And then I studied Royal Dutch Shells and some other companies in the Amazon. And this was in the 90s. And if you all remember, in the 90s, we were talking about how the industry was going to have to go more and more into remote, in terms of social and environmental remoteness, like the Arctic and the Amazon, and into deeper and deeper water, and into more hostile environments, politically hostile environments. Then shale happened, and we don't really talk about that stuff anymore. And in the 90s, when we were talking about the Amazon and the Arctic, we were in environmental decision-making. Some of the majors, the big 3 or 4, were making important strides in ensuring that they took care of they were acting responsibly in terms of social and environmental impact. But with shale development, I agree with Carol and Michael that the market is answering that question for us right now. There's no company with any sense whatsoever that is going to go into an incredibly expensive environment like the Arctic, and I assume deep water offshore. Nobody, even the majors, aren't. Shale is mostly a large independent play. The Arctic and deep water are the big multinational corporations. That's their play, and they're smart enough to know that at $30 oil, you're not going into the Arctic anytime soon. However, the question that I have about that I frankly don't know the answer to, because I haven't looked at it, is we'll do it regardless of the loss if it means that we get the resource. So what I don't understand about Arctic governance is if the Chinese go in and do it, not that they have the technical capability to do it, or the Russians go in and do it and they can do it, then, by God, we will go in and do it even at $30 oil, because if it means that we don't get those leases, or however the Arctic is being governed, I really don't know, then we will go in. I'm sure of it. And same with offshore. I just don't see it happening. Maybe later. This is going to change. It always does, and the industry will come back. On Keystone, I'm going to answer the Keystone question. From our perspective anyway, or my perspective, the safest way to move anything around is pipeline. If you wanted to, if the Keystone issue is this symbolic issue, if you wanted to stop tar sands, you should have done it a long time ago, and the Keystone Pipeline is not about tar sands, and if that's your best shot at stopping tar sands, then it wasn't a very good effort. The pipeline is better than trucks, it's better than trains, it's the best way to move, it's the safest way to move anything around, and even though private property rights and eminent domain are very important questions, we have 2 million miles of pipeline in this country, and the Keystone Pipeline is not about, it's a symbolic, driven by the environmental community and their climate funders. It's a symbolic move to make a statement about the fossil fuel industry and the state of that industry. And if they want to hit tar sands, then they should do that directly.
So Marilu, for the tar sands, is in situ refining out of the question? I mean, if you look, forget about the nationalities and all of that stuff, and forget about pipelines and transportation. Is there enough economic value and environmental value in the tar sands to warrant the construction of in situ refining?
Well, my knowledge is very limited, so at the risk of appearing completely ignorant, I think it's going to be driven by the market.
So far, that hasn't been presented as an option, so far as I know. It's only been a fight about whether they're going to transport to our refineries, right?
Well, I think being somewhat familiar with the industry, the resource is going to be extracted as it has been, and it's going to be sold somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to be moved from point A to point B through somebody's
So what I'm
backyard.
thinking is, you know, if there's an economic proposition, the Chinese could build a refinery in Ontario,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
They don't need to transport it someplace.
So that becomes an issue of, if you want to stop tar sands, stop tar sands.
Right, exactly.
But
It
don't
points the issue.
stopping a pipeline among pipelines is not going to stop it.
So that's a confession of age. In 1976, when I was the deputy director of OMB, and we were at the end of our second energy disaster problem, with Americans driving on alternate days, depending on your license plate, if you remember all of that. You know, I advocated that we should do sufficient development in Alaska so that we had confidence in the level of reserves that were available, and then cap the wells. In lieu of spending the money to put 700 million barrels into the salt domes in Louisiana, you can tell I didn't win. But I still think it was a pretty good idea, because it would have given us a legitimate energy reserve that would have been available at our decision, instead of when somebody else decided to shut off Saudi Arabia or something. Anyway, Joe.
I actually don't have a lot to add. I mean, the market rules in so many different ways. I mean, the price of oil is a two-edged sword, whether it's high or whether it's low. When it's low, the sharp bad edge of it is that people stop buying economically or efficient vehicles, and so we've seen in almost an instant a dramatic change in the number of SUVs. In every class of cars, it's moved up one click. You know, wherever you were, it's moved up, except for energy efficient cars, which have moved down. But one of the virtues of low oil prices is this. It's simply not economic. Even honestly, for the Chinese or for the Russians, they may do some things in Africa, but they're not going to be drilling in the Arctic, because it's really, really expensive. And same thing with deep offshore dwelling. I mean, there are two kinds of offshore drilling. There's a lot of near offshore drilling that is going to keep going on, I think, in a lot of the.
It is a bit of the zeitgeist, right? It's a little hard to talk about whether we should be doing drilling in the Atlantic when there isn't one exploratory well left operating in the Gulf at the moment, because it's not economically viable to do that. So,
And I just on the touch on the Keystone, as I also agree, it's on both sides, not just the environmental side, on the economic, whatever you call the other side, is it's a religious issue. It's all religion. I started off my career representing natural gas pipelines. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of really safe pipelines in this country that provide gas to this very building that we're in and to houses. And so it's really crazy to look at it that way. On the other hand, it really, how many jobs? We're talking about 59 jobs. I'm making that up. But on both sides, it gets huge rhetoric. And really, it was all driven by funders left and right on promoting whichever side they were.
So Joe, there's a silent issue that in this campaign that you and I were talking about before we started, which I want to draw you into and get the panel's reaction to. At least in my monitoring, I haven't seen any useful or any discussion actually of where we are with nuclear power. It seems to me, if you've thought about these issues at all, you ought to have an opinion about nuclear power and where we are and what we have or haven't done in developing advanced nuclear power sources for energy. So I know you know about this. So
well, I mean, I've already said I'm a proponent of nuclear power. My job at EPA is often thought of as the assistant administrator for air, but it's actually the assistant administrator for air and radiation. So I spent a lot of time thinking about nuclear issues. But you keep trying to dignify this presidential race. I'm telling you that it's all.
No, I'm not.
It's all dog.
It's impossible.
It's all dog whistles and megaphones to the passionate left and right. That's all this is. And so I don't hear hardly any reason discourse. In fact, unlike you, I can't stand to listen to the debates. I'm sorry. I've tried it. I'm kind of a political junkie. I have just a hard time because no one is talking about real issues that really affect people. So, yeah, and that's left and right. I'm going to say, I don't like any of them right now. So the answer is, yeah, somebody's got to be thinking about what to do. If you really believe that there's a problem with climate, we have to do something. And that something involves giving, people are not going, there are two really, really big problems here. One is people like us in the Western developed world, we are not going back to 1890. That's not going to happen, no matter how virtuous people feel. And the other thing that's not going to happen is that the rest of the world, several billion, 3 billion people who don't have electricity at all, well, I guess 1 billion who don't have any electricity, and then about 3 billion inadequately served, they're not going to say, great idea, we're just going to stay like we are. So in that mix, something has to happen to provide a base, well, it's called base load electrical power for the world. And I have no problem with solar or wind. I think that's great, but there are just so many acres. There's so many constraints there. You can put a nuclear power plant in this hall, a small 50 megawatt nuclear battery. They're called. Toshiba has one. There are other. You can put it in this hall. It can run for 30 years without any maintenance. You could do that in African villages. You could do that, and you can. There's a way to get beyond the grid. So there are many, many virtues to thinking about this that way. But it's not going to be on Fox or CNN. I'm sorry. We're not going to be hearing that from any of these candidates right now.
I'm with Joe. What do the rest of you think about nuclear? Marilu.
So the big nukes, the sort of traditional arrangement for us, the Mitchell Foundation with our calculus, they take too much water compared to the alternatives. Even if you add in water for shale and water for coal. But I'm learning more about these small modular nukes, and I think that for us, and for other parts of the world, probably more importantly, like Joe said, I see it as a as a promising path forward, given that they require much reduced water, if I understand correctly, and the other emissions, again, besides just CO2, are reduced or zero. But I understand that there's still a ways to go on the technology and the economics.
So, Mary, here's a little factoid. In 1993, we made a deliberate decision in the United States to stop funding research on a fast breeder reactor, which among its other virtues would have used the spent nuclear waste that we're squabbling about where to store it as a powering fuel. And we made a deliberate decision in 1993 not to fund that research. So thank God the people in the UK and some people in France,
Right.
and some people in Japan have still kept working on nuclear research. But we checked out. As a nation, we basically said nuclear power is a bad thing. We're not going to learn how to make it better, more efficiently, more safe, and all the rest of that. Anyway, I'm sorry. Carol.
Today, on a market mechanism basis, it wouldn't be selected, not in the U.S. And I think that the technology for the small modular needs to continue to move forward. It has real opportunity for companies like an Alcoa or a chlorine to put side by side. It gets some combined cycle opportunities together. So, I think that has to continue as it is today. I don't think it would get selected for lots of reasons.
Yeah. Mike.
Two things. One, I do think that sort of in the foreseeable future in the U.S., the thought of a massive set of new 2 or 3 gigawatt plants is not likely to happen. I do think sort of a vision of 200, 300 megawatt reactors that can be built in a factory and deployed off a railroad car needs to be an aspirational goal. The other thing I would say is, it goes back to a comment you made earlier about sort of cost of carbon. In some sense, we do cost the long-term impact of nuclear in nuclear. We do put tariffs and charges and fees on nuclear plants to deal with spent fuel that we don't put on carbon-based sources to deal with the social cost of carbon. So there is, in some ways, the vestiges of a way we already do that. It's not something that you can directly map over into a carbon source. But if you look at sort of the long-term levelized cost of a new nuke plant, the delta between that and a new coal plant that meets all the regulations, the levelized cost a couple of pennies more. About half of that is the money cost, the long time frame it takes to hold the money to build a plant. And the other half is, in fact, something equivalent to the social cost of carbon. It's the social cost of dealing with the waste. Ineffectively, inefficiently, and perhaps even not adequately, but there is a cost already built into that model. So I think it's something we need to take a look at.
All right, so we should see if we have questions from the audience. The lights are blinding here, so forgive me for holding my hands up, but we'd welcome for any panel member a jump ball question, any questions you might have for us. And if not seeing any, we're happy to end early.
Can I use the podium to talk about one thing? Okay, so full confession, I have a vested interest in this because we make air conditioning and refrigerant solutions. But
are you affiliated with Carrier?
Unfortunately, I am. Yes, as Mr. Trump likes to remind.
I heard about you.
Yeah, you heard about us. But I want to talk about something slightly different because it ties together a couple of themes. So, 30% of the food that is harvested in the world is wasted. And if you count the carbon equivalent emissions from the energy used and the chemicals that are used, food waste is the 3rd largest emitter of greenhouse gas emission in the world. So I offer this to my colleagues here because it is a sustainable energy issue. How do we bring technology, how do we bring energy to, in particular, the rural world where more than half of that food waste occurs? It's a two-world problem. So in the US and in the developed world, we waste a lot of food because we put too much on our plates, because we don't put bent carrots in a bag, we only put straight carrots in a bag because nobody buys bent carrots, et cetera, et cetera. But in the developed world, more than 30% of the food goes to waste because people harvest food too early, because they need the cash flow, or because the food rots in the field, or because it's not properly refrigerated, hence my vested interest, which I've given you full disclosure on. But it really does map to energy, because the solution to the problems are often very heavily water intensive or energy intensive. So in a period here where we're talking about energy, we're talking about clean energy, we're talking about sustainability, it is a challenge I would sort of throw out to the community here. There are solutions which need to be very micro-based, and I think given what the students here work on in those kinds of programs around the world and the faculty. And I think there are policy issues. I think it's an opportunity. For example, we talked about Paris. We have 185 countries who signed up to commitments in Paris. Probably 160 of them have no idea how they can meet those commitments. And I think helping countries reduce their greenhouse gas emissions by making their agriculture more efficient may be something that things like the Green Climate Fund ought to be used for. But I would leave it to the folks here who are much better than I at understanding the economics, much better at understanding the policy issues associated with that. So forgive me for stealing the podium for just a moment, but I think it's a relevant topic.
It's great. Carol, do you have a last word you'd like to say?
We talked a lot today about energy, and we almost went immediately to power. Energy in this country and in this world encompasses so much more. Transportation, the natural gas that's used is the feedstock for almost all chemicals, everything that you see in this auditorium. So we have to make sure that we're addressing the whole thing and not forgetting any one area, because we've made more progress actually on the power space than we've made really anywhere else.
Marilu.
Amazing similarity. I think the big picture, sort of, I think I started with the big picture and the girl with the light bulb, but I agree with Carol and Michael that the Clean Power Plan, I mean, they didn't say this, but the Clean Power Plan, for example, focuses on coal-fired electricity generation, and yet we have these glaring areas in our economy that produce tremendous amounts of greenhouse gas, not just CO2, but greenhouse gases that we are not looking at all. And very importantly, at least to the Mitchell Foundation, is the water impacts of electricity or power or transportation or whatever you want to call the energy system, the energy that it takes to move and treat and distribute water around this country, around the world, is tremendous. The amount of water that it takes that's embedded in that food that we waste, the energy that it takes to create that food, if you add the water in it, I would imagine that food is probably one of the biggest problems that we have, and yet nobody talks about food really. Although the National Science Foundation, as some of you all probably know since you're in a university, has a new $75 million research program on the food, energy, water nexus. It actually has gotten some visibility, and the Mitchell Foundation, as an early funder of the energy water nexus, we had some influence on that actually happening, and I agree wholeheartedly with Michael that food, the growing of food, the energy and water embedded in it, the energy and water embedded in transporting it is, and then I think we throw 40% of it away in the United States. It's just a travesty. I would add that we need an economy-wide price on greenhouse gas, that these sector-by-sector options are not going to work. And I guess some people call it a carbon tax. I think it needs to be something than just CO2. We have this obsession with CO2 that I argue is driven primarily or partially by the NGO community, the environmental NGO community, and their funders, of which I'm one, but we don't fund climate work. But my funding colleagues spend hundreds of millions of dollars a year in fighting coal, CO2 emissions from coal. And I think that we need to broaden the funding community. I don't know if there's anyone in the funding community here, but I'll just say for the record, we need to broaden what we talk about as climate problems, which is more than just CO2. And we need to be concerned about all of the environment. Sometimes I have said that it'll be a luxury if my daughter has the opportunity to deal with climate change because the water problem is going to get her before climate. And I hope that that's not true. But I welcome a new generation of thinkers that you all represent to address the whole picture and not just the CO2 from coal-fired power plant picture.
Joe, a final word?
So we did get sucked into electric power. I spent almost no minutes of my day on electrical power. We are focused on light-duty vehicles that use gasoline, and Paris barely touched that. And we're sitting here in Pennsylvania. We have, trillions of cubic feet of natural gas. So let me jump way to the end and just say a component of the solution to this is we're going to have internal combustion engines for a really long time. No matter how you deal with the rate of adoption of electric vehicles or plug-in hybrids, it's going to be a long time. We're going to have a couple of billion internal combustion engines on the roads. We already have over a billion. So what do you do with that? The way to get this all conclusory, I'm sorry, Jerry, but I'm just going to go at the end of the conclusion is you could get as much as a 70% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions from the internal combustion engine if you do one thing. You need to convert them into higher compression engines. To have a higher compression engine, you need higher octane. The cheapest form of octane is alcohol. So we make plenty of corn, alcohol from corn today, but you can make alcohol from natural gas. So we have right here, and you have the cheapest. It's a dreadfully depressing thing. I mean, natural gas in this state is less than $1 an MCF, which is almost half what it is at the national. They have the so-called Henry Hub price. But so yeah, we have a natural resource that we own. It has the virtues of energy independence. It has the virtue of being cheaper. You can make a gallon of ethanol out of natural gas for less than $1 a gallon. You put that into internal combustion engines, increase the compression of engines, and you can get up to a 70% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions on this President Obama's timetable. So that's highly particular. It's highly self-referential, and that's what we believe in. But you can get the CAFE standard. You can help meet the CAFE standards, which are critical to getting GHG reductions from the transportation sector.
Okay, so I want to have two final words. One is to say, one of the things I learned in my 25-year industrial career in between my government stints is that one of the things we're taught, at least where I went to undergraduate school, life is about trade-offs. One of the things I found in establishing an aspirational goal of nobody being hurt at work and zero environmental footprint, water, solid waste, all the rest, it's not true that life is all about trade-offs. All of those things contributed to our economic standing, right? None of that had a cost that was uncompensated. It was a benefit every time. So that when we went from being 70% efficient in converting forgings into extrusions to 95% with ideas, and this is not about brute force or new technology, with ideas and a continuous learning system, it was all benefit. In effect, we got a 30% capital bonus by learning how to operate efficiently beyond what the manufacturer said was possible, right? So I don't believe all the stuff that is freighted in these conversations about, oh my God, we can't do that because the trade-offs are so enormous. And Marilu, you said something that I very much subscribe to. You know, unfortunately, the conversation we're having in the country these days is not about a worldview. But I tell you, it breaks my heart every time I think about the 2 million children in sub-Saharan Africa who die from under age 5, who die from diarrhea every year because they don't have clean water. That's an engineering problem, right? It's not, we don't know how to discover to solve that problem. That's a blight on civilization, that those kind of things exist. So I'm like you, you know, it's hard for me to keep from gravitating to what the hell's the matter with us about so many things, including these issues, when there are reachable solutions that are better for the entire society. So with that missionary statement, let me say thank you to each of the panelists. You guys are terrific, and it was so great of you to give your time.